Hey everyone, I've got a special video for you all today that's been a long time in the making. I was able to sit down with some of the Bloodhunt writers for an interview recently. What follows is the interview in full, where we discuss topics such as the inspiration for some of the NPCs, how quests and collectibles are written, and some of the other processes that go into writing for a game like Bloodhunt. I also tried to sneak in a few questions that could reveal some secrets about Bloodhunt's story, but I think they were on to me. I want to apologize if I ramble a bit on my end, as I was pretty nervous doing this, especially since I've never been on camera before, but I hope you all enjoy it. I unfortunately did not have time to ask all the questions I had lined up as we had some time restrictions to work with, but there's a good chance I may be able to do this again in the future, so if you all have any questions you'd like to ask, leave them down in the comments and I'll start adding them to the list. Without further ado, let's jump into the introductions.
Tobias Solem. I'm the community developer at SharkMob for Bloodhunt. My favorite clan is not one that's in the game. They're called the La Sombra, which are the ones with the dark tendrils, and they're not the friendly kind of clan. They're Sabat, but something about them appeals to me. And since I'm a community developer, it's part of my job to be well read into the world of Darkness. So my background is I've been a storyteller in the universe since the second edition, when that was launched, pretty much, and all up the way to my last campaign that I ran in Story Told was probably 5 years ago now. So I've lost my group.
My name is Martin Holtberg. I'm one of the co-founders of SharkMob. I also have the fancy title of narrative director. I'm the love child of Adventure and a Gangrel. My work on Bloodhunt started when the studio was founded in 2017, and we licensed the game from Paradox, or White Wolf at the time. And so it's been largely about setting up the direction and the framework for the world that we portray in the game, setting up the high-level vision for the main characters and for the primogens and for the clans that we chose, and then making the very smart decision of hiring Martin Wiechner to do the rest of the work. So on to the next guy.
Yes, so my name is Martin and I'm the lead writer on Bloodhunt, and I do the rest of the work. I lead the narrative team and go through the lore and the narrative, so we keep it to what we want it to be, and also keep in contact with Paradox and other partners. So, and I would say Toreador, but one thing I do like about VtM is that all the clans are appealing. I think that's one of the strengths.
My name is Christine. I'm a writer. I've been at SharkMob for almost exactly a year now. And I do what these guys tell me to do. I help develop the characters a bit more, but mainly I write things for the journal, quests, dialogue, things like that. And I would say my favorite clans are Toreador. No, not Toreador. Sorry, Nosferatu and Brua, probably.
Okay. You were trying to appease the lead, but that's fine. Perfectly fine.
I have a will of my own.
Yes, you do.
If somebody was interested into getting into writing for video games or anything like that, like what are the kind of recommendations you would give for that? Because I know I've one thing I've noticed with games in particular is the writing for it. People come from all kinds of writing backgrounds for it, and it's always kind of all over the place. This person was a technical writer, this person wrote screenplays or novels, and it's just they all kind of get it mixed in there together. But do you see a better path to doing something like that?
When it comes to getting into the industry in general, but more specifically as a writer, I think one of the strengths of the gaming industry is that you don't really need a formal education or a formal background. You can come from a bit all over the place, like you said. With that said, when I've hired writers, I've looked at a lot of things. Primarily for me as an interest in whatever subject matter. In this case, it was Vampire the Masquerade, obviously. That's very important. with the amount of writers out there, you really want to find one that's passionate about what you're working on at the company when you're hiring. So what that means to someone who's applying for a job, I would say apply for jobs at studios that have projects that you really want to work on. That's going to increase your chance, especially if you can prove through a CV, through other work you've done, even if it's fan writing. If you can prove that you know the games or the IPs and that you know are fairly competent as a writer, I think that's a good shoe-in. My first job as a content provider for an MMO called Neocron back in like 2000 started with getting in on the fan fiction side of things, and then one of the writers who was there liked what I was writing, and they hired me on as a freelancer. And so, you know, it's kind of what you're doing as well. Get invested in the community, put stuff out there, really engage with the developers, and you know, usually things come out of that more than anything else, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like the thing is to try to get as much experience as possible, and that could be with just trying to write as much as possible, or getting a position in a studio, or like whatever you can do to get some kind of experience that you can show, and then I guess have a bit of luck. Or like find a network or something. It's very hard to just come from nothing and just get a position from out of nowhere. Everyone here has like worked for it in one sense or another, coming from different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a testament to what Martin said, the whole idea of just getting a foot in, regardless of what that means when you just come to the studio. Martin started out doing videos for us, internal videos, as a video editor, and now he's lead writer.
Wow.
So there's like different things you can do. The most important thing is just get in there and start making friends, making contacts, start networking, and then you work your way towards wherever you want to be. So that there's like, I would argue, if you really want to do something in the gaming industry, there's no bad job in the industry to start with. Just get a job and then work from there.
Yeah,
like for writing specifically, I think it's good to get like professional experience writing, and not just show that you are able to write creatively when you're at home and have infinite amount of time to do whatever you want, but actually that you are able to like keep deadlines and convey a message that someone else is telling you to convey, basically.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, you know, it's good to hear stuff like that too, because especially nowadays when gaming has become such a huge industry, and you know, there's all kinds of like specialized colleges and courses and schools and stuff, and some of that can be a bit overwhelming. So it's good to know that like the old methods still work too. I mean, obviously there's, you know, the networking is really important. It's always has been. Because like I did actually go to school for game design for a little bit. I wasn't able to finish due to extenuating circumstances, but that was always like one of the biggest things I told you, is just, you know, get to know people, get your name out there, make friends, you know, it goes miles.
Yep.
So obviously that still tracks.
And I would also say, like, when it comes to writing for games explicitly, it's like if you have, it's easy to think that if you have like a background writing novels and so on, that will bring you far, and it can do, depending on what kind of text you're writing, but it's more about how you write. So for example, Christine has a copywriter background, and when writing for games, it's super important to keep like the text short and condensed, and like getting to the point when it comes to dialogue, but also like all texts in a game. So practicing that, as you said, like coming from like a technical writing background or copywriting background, as long as you have the creativity too, it will make great texts.
Yeah, I can definitely say that's an acquired skill, like having started using Twitter just in the past year or so. Like I am constantly having to write something, and then I have to cut about half of it out just to make it work. So yeah, there's definitely some skill involved even in something like that. Okay, I suppose we can move on to the next section, get more into like the game process itself and stuff. As I'm sure everybody that will be watching this knows, Paradox and the World of Darkness brand team have been really invested in this. Like, even before, like, there was that leak that happened before the game was announced, and they were on top of it, trying to get what your guys' side of things out there, because everybody just saw, Vampire the Masquerade Battle Royale game. This sounds weird. And they like Outstar and the rest of the team, they were on top of it like almost immediately to get you guys on like the World of Darkness news show and stuff like that. So it's obviously they've been really supportive pretty much this whole time. So I guess kind of the first question there is like, what was the process of working with them like?
Right. I can start because I started the process, and then Mark will take over because he finished it. But to me, I worked with other license holders in the past. I've been in the industry for like shy over 20 years. And so I've worked with a lot of license holders. And by far, Paradox / White Wolf has been the most enjoyable experience for me, because they're very open, and they still have an extreme knowledge of their IPs, obviously. A lot of times you get stuck working with people who are tasked with taking care, they're like caretakers of an IP, but they're not masters of that IP. And in this case, the caretakers are the masters of the IP, and that makes it a lot easier. And we came in just as the V5 edition was getting wrapped up, so we had a chance to be integrated with the core rule books. There was a very clear purpose on what Bloodhunt was supposed to do, and kind of to get back to the point you raised there about Vampire the Masquerade Battle Royale, what the fuck, pardon that beep. But that was like, we knew we wanted to make an action-oriented game. When we started working on Bloodhunt, that was still when Battle Royale was just a game mode. It was in its infancy. It wasn't even a genre yet. And for us, long-term fans of the franchise, we were like, okay, so an action-oriented vampire game, that's kind of cool. We want to get in on that, because we've done action PC games and console games for a long time. So for us, that was an interesting fit and an interesting avenue to explore. And we also knew at that time, we felt confident that there would be a good classic Vampire the Masquerade experience coming out soon, which of course was Bloodlines 2. And so we were happy starting on the project knowing that we would come out after Bloodlines 2. And that didn't quite happen, as is often the case in the gaming industry. We ended up coming out before Bloodlines 2. And so that was, in a way, a bit of a problem. But at the same time, I honestly think a lot of fans most fans handled it quite well. Like, people quickly identified, is this something that is for me or not? And then they kind of made that decision. And a lot of people saw like, okay, so it's a different gameplay than I want, but it's the same universe, and there's a lot of cool characters in there, and there's a lot of cool story, and that's integrated with the main storyline. So I think we came out in quite a good spot in the end anyway, but it was a bit bumpy there for a while. Not exactly according to initial design in terms of how it rolled out, but I think we landed quite well. I don't know, what do you think, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, that's also part of making a game, to adapt to like new features or community feedback or so on, in our case, but also to the reality, the environment you're working in. So in a way, I think actually not having Bloodlines 2 helped us get a little bit more narrative systems into the game. In a sense, it kind of affected that. But then, like working with Paradox, we have an open channel to Karim. So whenever there's a question, we can ask him about it. And they are super supportive, knowledgeable. When we have a question, they understand that we're making a Battle Royale game, and that we sometimes have to adapt to that reality. And sometimes it's something is a little bit over the top, and then we pull back on that. So it's a good discussion, and just respecting both sides, but we all want the IP to be strong and work.
I think fundamentally the World of Darkness brand team, they are at their core game designers, which is very good because they understand that a battle royale game has needs that an RPG does not, just in terms of basic stuff. Like, it's a multiplayer competitive game, so you need telegraphing between players. You need to be able to see what powers the other ones are using, etc. And in an RPG or in the tabletop game, you don't envision the powers with that layer of visual component to it that we had to add for the players to understand what was going on. And obviously the brand team immediately realized, yeah, of course, that it has to be like that. Okay, so how do we do that in a way that is as respectful as possible to the core material, but still serves the function of telegraphing to other players what's going on in the world? And there were many examples of that where I thought, yeah, it's great to be working with someone who is a game designer at heart and not more interested in the marketing aspect of it, or doesn't understand game systems and things like that.
Yeah, that's, I know, like watching the early stuff about the game when it was first announced and stuff like that, like that was one of the first things I remember Outstar talking about, in fact, was, you know, like, yes, all these moves are flashy looking, and yes, that's not normally a thing in the tabletop, but it's necessary for the kind of game that it is. And like, they were really on top of like answering all those kinds of questions, which was really cool to see. It showed that they really care about the project too.
I think that also relates to like how people are playing the role-playing game, the tabletop game, because not everyone plays it the same way. Some have more of an action-oriented play style, and some prefer to play the political game or the personal horror. And I think it works well if you're just a bit open-minded to what the IP can be.
Yeah, no, that was like always, that was like one of the big like things against the game originally. It was like, oh, you know, that doesn't happen to Vampire the Masquerade, but it really does though. There are lots of people that play the game like that. And even in the lore itself, there were tons of, well, I shouldn't say tons, but there were some very significant events that were exactly like what this is, pretty much. So, and I think the community, as well as, you know, the brand team, all did a really good job of like, you know, redirecting those people as much as they could, which is good to see. You know, the community as a whole has been really great for this game, I think, for the most part, and it has been like super helpful. Like anytime I've like really looked into it.
And I guess it's like when you look at the community reaction and response to things, it's always like an issue of people can be a bit selective when you talk about remediation. Like they focus on a certain aspect. They focus on the vampire IP is focused for, like, if you look at it, a lot of it is about intrigue and conniving each other and stuff like that. And some people get sort of locked into that aspect and don't understand that maybe it's like a wider thing, because there are indeed violent resolutions to certain problems. We have seen examples of that, and Bloodhunt is not an exception, so to speak.
Or is continuation of politics by other means. So eventually people are going to fight if they don't get their way, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Even vampires do that.
Yeah.
That's actually like one of the coolest things I found about how you guys set up the story for the game too, is like, you know, that's not even the only time this kind of thing has happened in Prague. So, you know, obviously it happens.
Yep, for sure.
But I guess kind of along the same vein as the last question. So obviously communication is really good back and forth between yourselves and Paradox. Like, you feel like, is that like a line of communication just like as frequent as it was when you guys were first starting out? Or is it kind of, do they leave you to your own devices most of the time now?
I think the answer to that is that production goes through different phases and cycles where you need various intensity of communication with the license holder. Ideally, you get most of the information you need early, and then you start producing it, and then you have regular syncs where you just check, okay, is realization done in the right way here? Is it too over the top? Is it where we want it to be? So the intensity of communication goes up and down during the development of the project. And I guess that's true as well for basically any entertainment product you do. There's just times when you're all in production execution mode, and there's really no reason to be talking until you have something to show and talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And also that there's like in the beginning, everyone like we don't know each other, the different teams, and the IP might be new to some and so on. And further down the line, when we have like asked questions or sent them like dialogue, then you get that feedback on what works and doesn't work. So the process gets more lean and like simple. We don't get as much feedback as we used to because we know what works and doesn't. So.
Okay. But also Paradox still checks a lot of the things that are written that go in the game.
Yeah, it does. We do send the stuff, the content that we created to them, but mostly it's just thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, clearly there's an approval process.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, we are using their IP, and so they're very invested in making sure that they have a chance to feedback on all the stuff, which is exactly what they should be doing. So I think that's worked quite well through the years. Years, actually. Amazing. Right? Since 2017. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before, like you guys started development pretty much like as the 5th edition was being developed as well. So, and like I've pointed out to people, and I know other people have noticed too, that like even like the original core book and the first couple books that came out contain a lot of your guys' art and like early production stuff. So like, and kind of like along that vein, like obviously more books have come out since then. Like, have you guys given any input on any of that stuff? Like in particular, the Second Inquisition book obviously features the entity and the red gas and a lot of things that we see in the game. Like, was there any communication there with you guys as far as how that was used and how it worked and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a bit of back and forth on different subject matters, starting from the core rulebook all the way up to the expansions you mentioned. When it comes to the Second Inquisition and the entity specifically, they were kind of created with the entity, not the Second Inquisition, was created with Bloodhunt in mind. A lot of that work came out of Shark Mob. The same for the gas, obviously being connected to a core mechanic of the genre, and some other stuff. So it was quite interesting to be able to pitch in and do that work, both when it comes to the concept art, but also some of the more intellectual material around the entity and stuff like that's in the books. As a long time RPG player, tabletop RPG player, I thought it was awesome to finally be able to work on one of my very beloved licenses. What sucked was that I couldn't get credited for it because it was confidential at the time. But there you go. You don't always get what you want, right? But yeah, there's a constant back and forth. They're obviously as respectful of our material as we are of theirs, and they know that, you know, contemporary modern time prog entity that's closely connected to Bloodhunt. So there's always this discussion and back and forth about the different topics.
Okay, I guess kind of getting into the specific writing stuff. Can you kind of explain like the writing process for the game? Like, how do you guys handle it? Like, do you look at like quests first, or do you have like an overall like plot line that you're following that you've developed beforehand? You know, just kind of the general process that you go through.
Yes, I think it's important to remember that this is a live game, and that's like the context for how we create content. It's we have ideas for where we want to go with stuff, but it's more about like creating threads that we can work on depending on like response from the community, but also with what we want to put into the game. So from our perspective, like we have ownership, I would say, over some of the like the narrative stuff that we want to push forward that we think is interesting. But then there's always features and other content, like from environment art, for example, map updates that we just work to contextualize, and then we try to keep all of this in one package for it to make sense. So it's a pretty dynamic process with a lot of trying to lay the jigsaw puzzle pieces and trying to just make it work in a way that it makes sense.
Okay. Is there anything in particular you usually focus on first? Like, you know, say going into like a new content like update, like is there something you focus on like before anything else?
To answer that, it's kind of the overall production kind of dictates where narrative puts its focus on an update. So as an example, let's say we introduce a new archetype, then a lot of the narrative is going to be around that new archetype. But if it's not the archetype, then maybe it's something else, a new location or a new character. So the big chunk of production content decides the narrative focus of that update, of course, because the narrative kind of has to explain and also give meaning to a lot of these things. So it's not just a bunch of pixels on the screen, but actually have their integration into the world.
And then at the same time, there's also the production reality where a feature can be pulled out because there's a bug or for some whatever reason. And therefore, we're trying to like anchor stuff together so that it works, but it's not dependent on each other. So the whole House of Cards doesn't just crumble because we pull away one piece of the puzzle.
Okay. I know you kind of commented on it a little bit earlier, but it was an actual separate question I had in here. So like, is there things that you have changed already or, you know, plan to change based on player feedback for the story? Like, I know you kind of made mention of that before, but that was one of the things I was actually curious about.
Yes, I would say so. Usually it's not like a big change, but it can be more like just like, okay, people really like Omnis. Why do people like Omnis? And then maybe we try to push that a little bit more just to as fan service, basically. Small things like that. Do you have any other like examples?
I mean, a lot of the examples I'm thinking of aren't in the game.
That's always an issue that we don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah, but no, like overall, what you're saying, like, yeah, we won't change the main storyline and we won't change the plans we have for the characters, for example, because those are like too anchored, and if we would change that, it would feel disconnected. But we can absolutely change smaller things, like put in a clue here and there, or things like that.
And also sometimes the community, we can see if does the community understand this thing that we tried to give them or not. And maybe like a new clue can be helpful to like make people understand.
I think we've definitely seen cases of that. Like, I know the well, I would call it death of Prince Marcus was a pretty big shock to a lot of people. Because especially with the way the story's going to be going, is, you know, everybody was like, oh, you know, he's going to be here any minute now, you know, we got to get ready for him. And then season 1 hits, and it's just like boom. So surprises like that can be really fun too. Like, it was, you know, all the speculation was in a completely different direction originally, and then it was like everything shifted gears. I guess this is kind of like a sideline question, but like, is there obviously Martin Holberg does a lot of different things for the game, but like, so more for Christine and Martin W. Is there anything that you guys do for the game that isn't strictly like a narrative thing, like that's kind of outside of the normal scope of the narrative team?
It's always hard to say like what is part of narrative and not in a sense. But for example, there's been a few trailers that we been part of. Is that narrative or is that something else, for example? But things like that we do.
Okay.
We have like contact with environment art. As I said before, like contextualizing stuff.
Yep.
But otherwise, we do have we are the narrative team, so everything we do will affect that in one sense or another.
Narrative is a quite broad term,
Yeah.
at least these days, especially for a live game, because it's delivered in many ways, right? So the narrative of the trailer or trailers need to obviously match the narrative of the game, so the writers need to be involved with that. We do a lot of work with what we call environmental storytelling, which is the environment artists and the level designers, and this micro stories they create and they put out there obviously needs to carry the narrative, so there's a close connection there. Often it can be about realization, as our local IP experts, writers have to pitch in on anything from animations to character design work. So it's very broad. It's not just the actual treatment and writing of words. It's also about how those words kind of translate into the game. Very multidisciplinary task, actually.
Yeah, and then there's also like marketing texts and UI texts and stuff like that aren't strictly narrative, but that needs to match the game, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that whenever we release patch notes or anything, things that perhaps are a bit technical by nature, but are explained through like what is this doing? When I, for example, write patch notes, I send them to Christine because she needs to check. Well, it's from everything to how everything is named, so it's expressed as it should be, and stuff like that. So super multidisciplinary, as mentioned.
Okay, getting more into like the actual content itself. We're starting to see references to various characters from other VtM books and things, and getting more direct references in the game now to those characters. Is there a chance we could see any of them in the game itself in the future?
Right. That's not at all an impossibility. There are some factors to consider, though. One is, of course, do they fit with the story and the lore of our game? Would they be there at this time? Does it make sense from our point of view to include them? And then it's also being respectful of other studios and other license holders. They have their characters, we have ours. So it's not an obvious clear cut all the time how you transfer characters between games. But in theory, yes, a lot of these characters could appear in the game, absolutely. No spoilers in this show.
Also, something to it that, like, if we would to add Beckett, for example, Beckett has been so much part of like the current V5 or the transitioning into it. There is always a risk that the more we use a known character like that, that we like stumble on stuff and it starts to work against what's been written already and so on. Mm-hmm. So it's, yeah, preferably we try to keep it our own characters because we have full control over them and won't upset anyone, even though it's checked by Paradox. I mean, yeah, there are examples from earlier games where it's like the books say one thing and the game says another, and preferably we want to avoid that happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's the easiest way to maintain a high integrity of the universe and the lore when you have many different companies working on the same franchise. Then it's one easy way of doing that is to kind of silo it a bit and not do too many guest appearances. But there's nothing really preventing it in theory. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of along the same lines of like things that we from the broader VtM universe, like in the past, we've had very little information on like the first convention of Prague, and info we've started getting in Bloodhunt has kind of started expanding on that a lot more. I think we've seen more in Bloodhunt about the first convention than had been in any of the books previously. So with that, like, do you plan on kind of continuing to flesh out that like previous events like that in the city's history, or they're like maybe even like talking about like events that hadn't been revealed before that we can learn about?
Well, I would say that one important thing for us when we write is that everything we write needs to have a purpose. So in a lot of those cases, for example, with the Kirill's room in the Elysium, for example, that doesn't only say something about the first convention, but it also speaks about the Brua, then Kirill's experience in Prague and so on. So if there is a reason for it, for our game and our narrative and our characters, then that could absolutely happen. That would be the short answer, I would say.
Okay. I think it's safe to say that like you guys have already created some incredibly memorable characters. I think just about every single character that's unique to or original to the game has been pretty much a success, from what I've seen at least. I guess let's start on the topic of the characters. What character do you have the most fun like writing for or about, or in the case of those of you who don't write, which one's your favorite?
I could start with my favorite character. Are we talking specifically about Primogen, or could it be like
any of the unique Bloodhunt characters?
Yeah, in that case, one of the things that I like about characters is a sense of mystery. And when M was introduced, there was like an aura of mystery around her. So I was curious about like what happened, what happened for her to be there, and what revolves around her. So for me, the introduction of that character was interesting. I find the other characters very interesting in general, but because she was like, okay, why is she here now? What's going on? That sort of drew my curiosity a little bit more. It piqued my interest. So for my sake, it's M.
Right. For me, it's a bit more difficult because I kind of all the current ones in there. I started the seed for, and then Martin took over and fleshed them out together with Christine and Lucas. But they're like, when I create characters for games, I draw from my own life and I put something into the character that I know very well, that I'm familiar with, and that becomes the seed for that character. So there are different things in all of these characters that are very important to me. And so there's a lot in Omnis that I draw from my own life. There's a lot in Maya that I take from people that I know. Kirill is a type of character that I've always enjoyed. A very complex character, actually, but on the surface might seem simple, but there's a lot of depth to him in a way that I really appreciate. And Custos is he's fun to me because in a way me and Martin have hidden a deep mystery in him as well, a big enigma that I don't think anyone has really started unraveling yet. So that one is one I keep looking out for when people talk about him. I find it interesting because I think we hid there. And then of course M, which is the namesake of my daughter, whose name is Amelia. There's so some things in there. She's the child of someone, and obviously a child of someone, but
a child of
yeah, exactly. No, but yeah, in a way, but it's the whole when I laid the foundation for her, I was literally seeing her as the child of someone, like aspiring to someone else, and that had a lot to do with having a kid myself. Yeah. I'm interested in all of them, but for very different reasons.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, they mean a lot to me too. I think the groundwork that Martin laid was great to start with, and then to continue to work and find like from all those things that Martin wrote about them, just expand on it and try to keep keep both their like inner motivations and their outer motivations connected. Made all of them like super important for me. But when it comes to writing, the most fun I've had is when I've been writing for Kirill, especially those weapon texts, because I kind of could write whatever I wanted, and I love when I write and like surprise myself with a joke or something and start with that. And there was a lot of that with the Kirill.
Yeah, I would say like on my end, like I probably had the most fun writing the video that I did for him just because of all of those stories, like between the double barrel shotgun story and the fire axe story and so on and so forth. Like it's hard to pick a favorite, honestly.
Yeah, for me, I also really, really love our characters. And one thing that I can get kind of almost sad thinking about is that we will always know more about them than the players will. And like everything that we know about the characters will never like be official, and I just want to like share everything because I think it's so amazing and I love them so much. But of course it's also like an interaction with the players. Like the players also get to interpret what we write and create their own characters in a sense. So it's not like we don't hold the answers either. It's also in this interaction, right?
But I think that's an extremely important point that you just raised. The entire narrative has been designed in a way to allow you guys in the community to make up your own conclusions and kind of investigate the background and the personality of all these characters. So we have the answers to many of the questions that you're asking, but we're never going to lay them on the table that plainly because we want it to be a discussion, and it's more interesting that way because real interesting characters aren't that flat that everybody immediately understands what they're about. And so that's also like we see sometimes people discussing things and we go like, okay, I guess you can interpret it that way. Yeah, of course, fine. But then we know what we actually intended, and that's like I suspect you might have a question along these lines later. But it's very interesting sometimes to see how people read characters based on their own life experiences and of course where they're coming from. So that's always interesting.
Yeah, for sure. My favorite to write for is M. I have lots of fun writing her, like her dry sense of humor and kind of like superior attitude disguised as humility in some way. Yeah, I love it. It's very fun. But I love writing for all of our characters.
I've really enjoyed the characters in the game. They've all turned out to be like very just dynamic, and they have all kinds of depth to them that, you know, when you just talk to them once in a while, you don't necessarily get. And, you know, you kind of touched on like a question I was wondering too, that I don't think I had it in the list, but it kind of occurred to me as, you know, has there been an interpretation of like things that have happened in the game or have been said about a character in the game that are just wildly different from what you intended that you've seen?
Well, you know, dancing around the elephant in the porcelain shop here, but Custos has a remark that he does about Omnis, which triggered a response that was, yeah, I'm going to say it was unexpected because that's never how I saw his view of Omnis. And then I've read all the dialogue, of course, and I know his profile intimately. So to me, it was like, I can at the same time see and understand that interpretation of what he said. Yeah, so that's a lesson for all of us in the craft. Really keep in mind is like, okay, you kind of have to shine a light from many different directions on whatever you put out there. But yeah.
I mean, talking about complexity with characters, Omnis in that regard is so complex, yeah, because they are so secretive, and so I think you can really interpret them in several ways.
And that's also the point, actually. Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to wanting to create characters that can be discussed and debated. And what sometimes happens, and again, I understand this, I have all the respect in the world for this, but sometimes the discussion switches from being a discussion about the character to a discussion about what the developers had the character do, which is there's a point for that, and it's valid sometimes, but sometimes it can also be because you are looking at it from an unexpected way or from an unintentional way from the creator side. And so I think we as creators can always get better at how we present things, but I also think that fans sometimes need to take one step back and go like, okay, but maybe there's more complexity to this issue than what we're immediately facing right now. But yeah, so it's a bit of a learning experience on both sides, I think, especially a narrative that's intended to be interpreted, not just taken at face value.
And in the end, I would say with like this discussion about the intention and how a player reads something, that if you read a character and become like stronger or happier from how you read that character, then that is awesome. So like own the character and read it however you want.
Yeah, and that's how we do it in real life as well. We always have like a specific understanding of people that we meet that doesn't necessarily reflect exactly on who they are, and like there's the side that we trigger in different people, like by our own presence. So if I'm with a person, if I'm with a character, perhaps I'm bringing forth a particular side of their interest. So that kind of reflects in games as well, like what is my personal interpretation of that individual. And it doesn't necessarily have to be false, but it's a perspective. It's a way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I suppose since we're kind of on the subject, we can cover this a little bit. So in Omnis's case specifically, obviously, like that's probably the character that's most shrouded in mystery. You know, we don't even know what they look like, etc. But because of, you know, as you said, lines that are spoken in the game, particularly by Custos, you know, it's clear that they prefer they/them pronouns. The LGBTQ community especially kind of like took that and ran with it. And that's where a lot of the debate, so for those that don't know that are listening, so that's kind of been the big hang up there is Custos talks about their preferred pronouns and is obviously very disdainful of that and sees it as an inconvenience that they want to be referred to as something differently than what he's used to referring to people as. And a portion of the community took that in a very poor direction. But I can understand it too, just for, you know, obviously everybody's personal struggles are different and the things they've had to deal with. So and it seems like the biggest contention there is not necessarily that Custos felt that way, but that we didn't have any of Omnis's side of that. So like, is that something that you feel, is that kind of what you were referring to as far as like something you could handle better in the future?
That's definitely one of the things, but like let's be brutally honest and face it. Game developers aren't perfect people. We roll things out and then we learn and we become better at telling stories. We become better at creating systems. We become better at getting our points across. So I think you should always be careful when you try to conclude why something is the way it is, because it could also be the result of factors that you don't realize at the time. But just to give an example, again, we have a very extensive bio on Omnis. We have a very extensive bio on Custos, dating all the way back to when they were born, everything they went through up until the point that they're in the game. And when you look at the bios from that perspective and you get their motivations and you get their ideas and everything they are and what they stand for and what they've gone through, this is not a very strange question. But when you only have a very small snippet of that, because that's how we rolled out the narrative at that point, then I definitely see how you can come to that conclusion. But we were kind of blinded by having all the info on our side. So we never saw it that same way. But I have like I said, I'm very respectful towards seeing it that way and having that point of view. I totally get that. So that's a lesson learned. Like when it comes to making complex narrative, that's complex. So getting it rolled out in a way that makes sense to everybody, that's definitely something we can work with and become better at, for sure. Because I want people to speculate. At the same time, I don't want them to get snagged on on things like this, because this is a very real topic and a very real concern for a lot of people that I think is super important. And if that becomes the discussion about Custos' relationship to Omnis, that's not necessarily what's part of their relationship. So, you know, it's complicated.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like, you know, there's, I guess the best way to put it is there's, you know, good faith takes and bad faith takes on, you know, what the intention was there and stuff like that. And I think, like, as the game has progressed a little bit further, we've seen some of, like, the intention there, like, because like there's been statements made by Custos in addition where, you know, because of, like, a deal that the Nosferatu had with, like, the princes in the past and stuff like that, that the lower areas of the Elysium are theirs and they get to determine who goes there and who doesn't. And it's very clear that Custos isn't welcome there and things like that. And, you know, we've seen more recently, I mentioned it in a video even, that, you know, he has started using the they them pronouns to refer to Omnis, and then also notes that he's still not allowed down there and things like that. So, like, I definitely think it's moving in the direction that, you know, if people give it time, they will see more of it and be able to, you know, understand more of the relationships there and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's another point that's worth mentioning as well. If this was a single player game, you would quicker get to consume the narrative because you could play through it in a number of hours or days, and then you get a much more complete view of their relationship and why they do the things they do. But we are parsing our narrative, releasing it, you know, slower than you would be able to consume it if you wanted to binge it, which means that there are many questions left unanswered along the way, and that narrative just has to be delivered. And so it's not really helpful for finding the answers quickly if you get snagged on something, right? You can't really get to the point very quickly because we haven't released the point yet. So that's another reason why it becomes complicated as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of along those lines too. Just as a like a side note kind of thing, like because I know I've seen it a lot. I don't know if you guys have seen all of it. I'm sure I know Christine has seen some of it. But just like, do you find it interesting how players interact with the characters because of how they perceive them? Because I know in the case of Custos specifically, there's players in the community that they'll stand in, like, specific spots when talking to Custos so that he looks like he's uncomfortable trying to talk to them. And, you know, more recently with some of the new emotes that have come out, they've been, you know, using them to interact with Custos.
I've absolutely seen that, and I love seeing the community interact with the characters in any way, shape, or form.
My favorite is the meme where Custos is standing there, and there's this is a cartoon meme, and all the players are sliding around him, and he's standing there, salutations, and he's sliding around the floors, and you sort of get the interpretation that this was not what I expected with these vampires.
But honestly, as game developers, what the community does with the game, that is the gold. That's the magic. That's the big payoff. And if it's a very serious discussion or if it's a funny meme, I think all of that is good for people and society as a whole. And I remember from another game we worked on, some of us at least, the Division. When you started playing that game, there was a small hiccup that we didn't quite catch on early because we didn't have enough people playing at the same time. But essentially, you needed to go to a very specific place and sign in on a computer. And when you did that in a multiplayer environment, people started forming lines because you could only do it one person at a time. So this fantasy of the singular agent saving New York, there were like 20 of them lined up going to the same computer. And it was awesome. It was hilarious and fantastic. People lining up in a game to press a button on the computer, logging on as the agent getting activated. Just fantastic. It's that's the goal. I mean, it's fun to create games, but it's even more fun to see how people interact with what you created. That's just fantastic.
There's definitely been a lot of that in the game, and it's always been quite fun. Like everything from, you know, anytime there's kind of a graphical glitch in any kind of video or anything, and people are like, oh, is this the La Sombra? Or, you know, everything down to, like, I don't know if everyone here has seen it, but somebody, because Custos is a gangrel, you know, people have speculated what kind of like animal they relate to and stuff, and somebody actually edited cat ears onto him and like that's passed around the Discord quite a bit.
Yes.
So I guess kind of to wrap up this vein of conversation. So like one of the things was always curious about in the case of Omnis in this particular topic is like there was older promotional materials that referred to Omnis improperly. Like one time I think it was in an email or something like that, and then also like there was one of the articles on the website that was from Marcus's point of view that you referred to Omnis as it. Like was this something that kind of like originally like the character was set up differently, and as you developed the narrative for Omnis and stuff like that, things changed, or was it just kind of like a weird slip up sort of thing?
I think, to be honest, at least from my point of view, Omnis has never changed, but people's perception of Omnis has forced us to kind of look at how we present Omnis. Again, this is very difficult because there is a big point to Omnis as a character, and just blurting it out here on a talk like this is not doing it any justice, and it would also be the biggest spoil so far, I think, in the world of Bloodhunt. So we're not going to do that. But let's just say that the player perception of Omnis matters, but so does Omnis established background that has yet to be revealed and yet to be explained. So there's a difficulty of juggling that, and also, like I said, we tell a narrative through many means. It's the marketing content has a certain marketing purpose, but also a narrative purpose and a narrative layer. In the game, we have different types of narrative that's being conveyed, and then of course, to make it even worse, we have not just the player's point of view on Omnis, but the other characters' point of view on Omnis. So it's not by any means a clear-cut interpretation of a character when you see the character through the eyes of other characters, because obviously they have their filter and they have their point of view and all of that, right? So you have to kind of know them to understand why they use the words they do or why they call other people the way they do, and so yeah, it's one of those things where it would be easier if everything was obvious to everybody, but then there wouldn't be a mystery. So
Yeah.
And I guess expanding on that, like if you're sort of writing something on behalf of a character and their perspective, like you have to sort of embody their prejudices and their personality, because the world is full of people like these.
Sure. I think the important point, if you ever end up in that situation, is that you have to offer a counterpoint. You can't just like have one controversial point of view without giving that some context or explanation or offering a counter view. But again, I'll just go back to the thing that I think this is more a case of player perception or individual perception of a situation than the actual intent of that situation to start with. I know I'm being extremely vague here, but I also don't want to spoil a character arc. So yeah.
So just to kind of cap that off, I know you guys can't say anything, of course, but I know one of the prominent theories that kind of would explain some of this, to some degree at least, is Omnis is actually multiple people.
Interesting theory. I'll leave it there. Interesting theory. But yeah, that would explain some things, right?
Yeah, I guess, but I don't know. There's been all kinds of like little details and stuff that have slowly been sneaking in that, I would say Omnis probably has the most like mystery around them, of course, for multiple reasons. Yeah. And there's this, I could probably talk about them for a while just for that alone. But okay.
No, but you're obviously right. There could be more at play here than the initial assumption that was presented on the forums, right? And I think it's just one of those cases where you're going to have to let the story unfold to get all the answers you need to make an educated conclusion about what or who Omnis is.
All right. Side note: you guys have great poker faces.
We tried.
So like when originally conceiving the characters that are in the game, because it's obviously the game's based on a TTRPG and you have knowledge of that, did you create any kind of like character sheet for them, like a traditional character sheet where you kind of planned out like the abilities they have, their skills and things like that, maybe in the vein of V5, like their touchstones and convictions that kind of guided how the character's personality developed?
Yeah, I did a high level character sheet, if you will. I usually do that for all characters I create, regardless of which game I do it for. I think it's easier for me to wrap my head around because I played a lot of tabletop RPGs. So it makes it easier if I give them some stats and some backgrounds, and this obviously lent itself quite well to that. And then Martin has evolved things after that and gone into more nitty-gritty parts of their personalities and their motivations, which has forced him to dig a bit deeper into things like touchstones and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was an important thing. That was one of the first things that I did when I started writing for the project, fleshing out that part, because it's also about knowing the V5 rules. And getting like the feeling that it comes from V5 and not like older versions of the game. For example, touchstones and convictions was quite important and also super useful in character development. And I think you can see that in some of the side quests, for example, that we have that information.
Yeah, so I think like Maya is a good example. Like we've definitely seen like what could be touchstones and convictions for her between like her wanting to protect the mortals in the city, and in the case of some of the side quests, like focusing directly on specific people. Kind of going into some specific characters just because I'm curious. Will we ever get to see what's under Omnis's mask?
That's a very good question. In a way, I hope not, because I like the mystery, and when you explain a mystery, midichlorians, it kind of loses its power, right? So I think I don't know for sure, maybe not, but I like the mystery there. So yeah.
To make it even more mysterious, maybe we already have.
Right. Good one.
Well, like another character specific question I had, because I don't know, like I find some of the most obscure characters the most fascinating. I think like I've done videos on a couple of them. I plan on doing a couple more, but like characters like Mouse and Jonah, the like quite possibly the vampire that started the whole ordeal. Like is there a possibility of seeing more of them, even possibly in the game outside of just the journal?
I would like to go back to the same thing that Martin pointed out before. If it has a purpose, then it may very well end up in the game.
Yeah, I imagine, like especially with Jonah messing everything up, it would be great to have like a sitcom. Jonah, everything all the time that he have like broken the Masquerade in different
spin-off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had a small fascination with Jonah, just because like everybody's like, well, how did this start? And everybody's blaming everybody else, and there's just this bumbling anarch that came from Berlin that just stumbled into everything. It was really fun reading that whole thing. Okay, so getting more into the subject of the journal itself, like how do you come up with the clues and other collectible items, like the clues especially, like half of them or most of them seem like they're almost just like random tidbits and curios about the world of darkness in general, and then some of them we've got have been like really zoned in and very specific and given some really intriguing information. Is there a greater meaning behind them? Like they're called clues. Like is there like an overarching like kind of picture in the background for why they are what they are?
Yeah, once again, like it's about the purpose, and I would say that random might not be like the correct word in a sense, because even if the purpose is just to like paint a picture of the world of darkness, that has been like quite important for those. And we actually commissioned Martin Eriksson, who's been very much involved in the V5 rule books, to write a lot of those to get the right feeling, especially for new gamers, to really like feel what World Darkness is about, but also placing some Easter eggs and so on in those clues. And then, as you say, some are perhaps more important for the narrative progression, like starting threads or just being red herrings. So, but you need a mix of them all for it to not become too obvious what is like important for the future and what is just world building.
Okay, kind of going back, like circling back around to talking about like working with like the environmental artists and stuff like that we talked about earlier. Like is there like a lot of like really heavy collaboration when stuff like that is like kind of bleeds into the narrative, like the environmental storytelling, or like even just like some of the cosmetics where there's like heavy lore references in them and things like that? Do you guys have a big hand in that?
There's definitely a collaboration, absolutely. I would say for vanity items like outfits and tattoos and stuff, we have been blessed with an art director with really deep lore knowledge. So a lot of those things comes from him. But we do name the items in the narrative team. So there might be some things in there that are lore references, absolutely. And for things like level design and environment art, we try to work very, very closely with them to increase like the narrative storytelling and environmental storytelling that we spoke about earlier. So things like the Ventru painting that is now in Kirill's room is one of those things that came from like a collaboration between teams, and those are very, very fun to get in the game.
I just want to say, in terms of that specifically, the spot on the wall in the venture area where the picture obviously used to be was a beautiful touch. I know I've talked to you on Discord about this a little bit, Christine. Like I know you mentioned that you guys kind of come up with like the quest objectives and stuff. When you make the quests, like do you come up like do you come up with the objectives first, or do you kind of try to make the objectives fit the story you're trying to tell with a specific quest?
Well, it depends on the quest, I would say. So for example, for the Halloween quest that we had last year, that was like a list of those like conditions we want to do something with. Here narrative, try to write something that connects it. And that was like the origin for that Halloween poem idea, for example. And some quests, I would say, a lot of them are more narratively driven, but we try to always think about what kind of game we are and use how you play a battle royale to integrate it into those.
Definitely, and we also try to check with other teams as well, like game design, for example, in this case. Like, is this reasonable? And they also, of course, can come with other ideas of what would be more fun. So,
and Lucas, who has created a lot of those quests, has been doing a great job to really make them more intricate and serve several functions.
Yeah,
some of them have definitely been interesting to do. So kind of like a slightly different elephant in the room. How did the killing Brujah while blood hunted with a katana, like stuff like that, how did that come about? Obviously there was some narrative purpose to that, but like it's just, I know that was one that like a lot of people are stuck on or had been stuck on. Yeah. And I know, I'm sure you guys got plenty of feedback about it.
We did. I think it's always like a difficult thing to know where to lay the difficulty for the players. Like, how difficult do we want this to be? And how experienced are the players? So it's also like in some way like experimentation almost, in the sense of where do people get stuck?
Mm-hmm.
Also, a factor to consider is the fact that you have players that are chasing these more difficult goals because they are already progressed through the battle passes, and they already done a bunch of the challenges, and they want something that is a little bit more hard to achieve just because they want to feel challenged. So we have to challenge the different types of players, not just the average player, so to speak. So it's difficulty to weigh what challenge do we present to the community, and of course there's going to be something that is an outlier and is a little bit harder. It's the same with 7,000 meters
Did one match
during one match, for example. It's like, yeah, it's an outlier, but on the other hand, you did have a lot of people who actually accomplished that, and they felt that sense of accomplishments. And for a player that maybe completes the battle pass in a couple of rounds or a couple of days, they want that type of challenge. They want to feel that, yeah, I'm trying to complete this, but I'm not there yet. But so you have to also take that into consideration.
And then add to that, like the perfect storm situations that sometimes happens when like everything has been planned and then like a feature is removed and like we have to react on that like late in the process, and then
That
there's
never happens.
that never
happens.
and then like a bug for something and then it's like, okay, this became very complicated.
And I think a lot of us have kind of seen that because, like, especially in the case of like one of those quests, you know, killing 10 Ventru with a crowbar, it's like, well, you know, when the Ventru were first introduced, they were everywhere. Everybody was playing them. They were a little overpowered, so you know, you saw them a lot more often. And then the nerf came in, and then you saw like you don't see them nearly as much anymore. Plus, the only one archetype. It was kind of, yeah, like you said, a perfect storm of, except in the opposite direction. Or it just didn't quite work anymore.
Or you don't see them because someone killed them with a crowbar. You know,
I wish.
It was my theory personally that they were mutually exclusive, and you only found crowbars if there were no Ventru.
Right, yeah.
That's the experience I was having for a good part of it. So, kind of talking about like collaboration and using characters from other things. We saw recently from Renegade, their Vampire the Masquerade Rivals game, they just put out a new city expansion that is set in Prague. And I know I was like, one of the questions I had originally when we were going to do this much earlier is, you know, were Bloodhunt characters going to be featured in that? Well, now we know they are, in fact. So like, I was kind of curious about the process for that. Is that something that kind of was set up through Paradox and the World of Darkness brand team, or did you work directly with Renegade to have your characters in their game? And kind of a two-part to it. And then they have their own characters that are, you know, part of Prague as well. Is it possible that we could see them in Bloodhunt?
So typically everything is handled through the brand team. They set up all these connections, and nothing really happens without them initiating it and driving it when it comes to cross appearances in different games, I guess. And again, I think we have to go back to the previous answer is, you know, it kind of depends on what's good for our game and what we want and what we need, which characters appear or don't appear. But again, I think this is proof that we can do guest appearances with characters across games, you know.
And the different collaborations can also, it'll be different depending on the team that we're working with. So it can look very differently, like either it goes just through brand team or they like connect us and then we have like discussions on the side and try to see if there is a good way to integrate this in their product and so on. So yeah, well, everything needs to serve a purpose, and I'm sure like everyone that's working on this IP, whatever product they are doing, they do love what they're doing. And when you create the character, even if it's just stats on a card and a name, like unless you have like a big idea for what they're gonna do in the future, most of the times they're pretty happy to hand them over and like get us to help them grow and become something more than just a card character.
I guess kind of a quick reframing of the last part of that question. You know, I don't know if you guys can say or not, but are there any characters that may be in that card game expansion that came from you that we just don't know they did?
You never know.
No,
Sorry.
no
Try.
No comment.
No,
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I guess we're done for this time, but we can absolutely set up again in the future. Don't worry about that.
Let's keep in touch, and if you feel like there's a barrage of more questions that you want to direct toward us, just keep in touch with me, and I can talk to my colleagues here, and we can bring up for the future as well. So that's definitely within the realm of possibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We really appreciate all the work you're doing.
yeah.
Yep.
We do.
I enjoy doing it. So
thank you, Meriden, for being such a you're really a part of the community that we really cherish. So thanks for all your lore videos and all your activities on the Discord, helping new players and getting people into the lore, because I think you've been one of the reasons why some of our newcomers have become invested in the lore. So we really appreciate that.
And when I said it's fun to see what people do in and with your game, it's almost more fun to see what they do with the game in other forms of mediums like YouTube or whatever. So really appreciate it. Fantastic work.
Thank you. I have a lot of fun doing it, and thank you for the game and the characters. I've told Christine before, the writing team on this game is incredibly talented. I have been, just every time new stuff comes out, I'm more and more impressed about I was excited to play the game because I love Vampire the Masquerade, and I wanted to see, when I found out there was going to be quests and stuff, what it would be like. And just, you've blown my expectations out of the water for what I was expecting, quests in a battle royale game to be like. So I really appreciate it. And, I have more videos than I have time to make that I want to make because of the work you guys do. So thank you too.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah, super happy.
Just send us a request if you need more, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank
I think
you.
after this have a good day.
Yeah.
Same to you.
Enjoy the lunch.
Yeah,
Pineapple. Oh, we have a smoke machine here.
Yes.